It's so nice to be with all of you here this morning, and thank you all for coming to learn a little bit more about New Road School. We're just so happy to be a part of the National Association and participating in this conversation about, education and how we can all do what we can to try to reimagine it for the future. Before we start the presentation, I wanted to introduce some of the folks from our team who are here. And Daniela Finisei, she is the assistant head of school for the educational program, and Mark Vickers-Willis, who is our director of community engagement, and Mario Johansson, who is our director of student wellness and human development. And each of us will be telling you a little bit about the school and hoping to engage in a conversation with you about it. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about what we call at New Roads, our liberation pedagogy and our climate and culture, because we feel that the climate and culture is really what makes New Roads a unique place to grow and learn. Next slide, Mark. So I am the head of school with Ern Williams. I've been in independent schools for over 30 years now, I think. I know I look a little bit young, but anyway, I was an independent school student myself, and I really gained a great deal from them. And I really believe that independent schools can be innovative laboratories to really help not only our own students, but to help to reform education more generally. Next slide, Mark. So really, for me to talk about the story of New Roads and how New Roads became New Roads, I really have to go back to Brown versus the Board of Education, because our founders looked around in 1994, shortly after the Rodney King riots, and they said, largely, Brown versus the Board of Education had not been successful. That what you were seeing in Los Angeles were actually increasingly segregated schools. And they said there is not a school that is socioeconomically, racially, and culturally diverse in Los Angeles that offers a top-notch education rich in the arts. And that the only way for us to make this great American social experiment work would be for kids to live and learn together. And because of that, they really had to develop this model that would become an incubator of human potential in all of its forms, and would really break out of the industrial model where one size fits all fits no one. And the assumptions about integration would change. I am the beneficiary in some ways of Brown, because in my early years, I went to public school, and my parents had gone to segregated schools in the South. And yet, even though I got an excellent education, there was a price to be paid in terms of my own racial identity and a positive sense of my racial identity that largely my parents had to hold for me. And diversity was looked at as something that was reluctantly accepted. It wasn't looked at as a benefit. Next slide. And so the research has really taught us that it's not only a moral imperative for us to have schools that are diverse, but if you can actually leverage the benefits of authentic diversity, there are incredible cognitive and social advantages. And I mean, when you look at it on every level, from standardized test scores to readiness for the global economy, to deeper problem solving and critical thinking skills. The kids are more innovative, which is, of course, at the heart of our economy and our prosperity as Americans. They develop multicultural competence, which is incredibly important in terms of them being able to develop cooperation and compromise to face the global problems that their generation will inherit. And it's a foundation for improved race relations. And obviously, I don't need to say much more about the critical and urgent nature of that now. And in this environment, it really depends on secure attachment, where every child is seen, heard, and valued, and is visible. Next slide. And so New Roads is built on a shift of paradigm from integration as something that is set up to basically redress, inequities in education, which was basically, in some people's eyes, forced upon the society, something that diminishes, rather than enhances. Our notion of integration is different at New Roads. It's based on this integrative model which honors the differences and supports the linkages, which is really a concept that comes from neuroscience. And it's built on the idea that essentially every child comes in with a gift, and that it is the work of schools to really be the incubators of those gifts in all of their forms. And that one of the things that we're doing is developing their individual potential, but at the same time, helping them recognize their common humanity. And so that is the foundation of our school and the soil of our school. Next slide. So the old road was, let's sort of that integration is something that we need to force on society. It is something that the assumption that it can demean and take away from the quality of education, and there's an inverse correlation between academic excellence and diversity. Our new road is that, in fact, you can't have academic excellence and rigor and scholarship unless you have a diverse population that is reflective of the community in which you live. Next slide. So the foundation of this really begins, you can look at it quantitatively in terms of the overall commitment to diversity on all levels of the institution, from the board, 28% people of color, to the administration, 42% people of color, to teachers of color, 40%. And all of this matters because everyone in our village, we call New Roads a village where we're all responsible for raising the children, they look like the world. And so the kids begin to see that their teachers come in all forms, and that in both as students and as teachers, they are able to expand themselves and their curiosity about the world and really embrace the full spectrum of humanity. But this has required a huge investment on the part of the school. The school since 1995 has foregone $120 million in financial aid to ensure that 40 to 50% of its students actually come from low to modest income families. And it is not simply that that's where the financial aid goes. We have upper middle class families on financial aid because we want to ensure, both socioeconomically and racially, that we have a full spectrum of families represented at all of those different socioeconomic levels. And I think this socioeconomic diversity is something that we don't talk about enough in private schools, because I think there's one thing to talk about racial and cultural diversity, but there's another altogether to bring in the factor of socioeconomic diversity, which we think is foundational to prepare kids for life and to tear down the walls between school and life. Next slide. So the real question is, how do you really, even if you have the diversity, how do you leverage that diversity to transform schools into intellectually generative environments that provide well-being and the liberation of human potential? So what you're going to hear from Mario and Daniela is you're going to hear them talk about how we translate this into the culture and climate of our school in practice, how we translate this into our pedagogical approach. And they are going to sort of show you this is the keys that we need to look at in terms of not just having the diversity, but leveraging the diversity as an asset and moving out of that model that was established for Brown, where diversity was not considered an asset. Danielle? Oh, this is one more me, excuse me. I guess the intellectual rigor. We felt it was really important because there's a lot of talk in independent schools about academic rigor. In New Roads, we definitely talk about that quite a bit. But one of the things, and you'll see how it's related to the conceptions of mind and identity that we embrace at New Roads, which are built on neuroscience. Our intellectual notion of rigor is also built on neuroscience. And it's really, seeking critically and creatively an understanding of the interconnected nature of reality and the interconnected nature of self and other, because we believe that this is the foundation for rich intellectual exploration, and it's the foundation for creating a society where there is more humanity and less dehumanization. And you'll see how this plays out in the climate and culture and in the pedagogy. And actually, Mario's going first. Mario?
Thank you so much, Lucerne. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us today. As Director of Student Wellness and Human Development, my role is largely focused on climate and culture, as Lucerne mentioned, since together they function as the foundational container for the execution of our humanistically centered education program. First, our conception of climate and culture, as again Lucerne was speaking to earlier, is rooted in Dr. Daniel Siegel's metaphysical notion of a social, emotional, relational field that serves as a container for the dispersion of human energy. Within this social, emotional, relational field, everyone is invited to contribute their energy to the space. That contribution is either generative, that is affirmative, or degenerative, that is negative. Both options represent a holistic representation of human possibility. The difference is that generative contributions are integrative, while degenerative contributions are disintegrative of the relational field. Within the generative social, emotional, relational field, the goal is to foster a profound sense of secure attachment for all the participants within the space. In terms of culture, New Roads' values and practice can be distilled down to three foundational integrative human development practices. First, there's the integrative practice of radical inclusion. We believe in the power of the big embrace. When youth are positively encouraged to express their uniqueness, the uniqueness of their being in all its manifestations, the result is that their field of acceptance is broadened and their sense of perspective enhanced. Further, when youth are taught that each individual provides a valuable contribution to the whole, their sense of belonging is affirmed. Our working motto is, if you're bold and courageous enough to show up as the individual you most genuinely identify as, whatever the social consequences, we're here for you. We've got you. We are your tribe. Two unforgettable kids who come to mind are David Belsham and his ornate historical military garb that he wore at least twice a week, always accompanied by a story if you dare to ask. And a recent graduation speaker, Ben Watson, who declared that he, quote, felt so comfortable in his own skin at school that he was free to explore other aspects of himself, end quote. Ben talked about how he didn't have to expend most of his high school energy pretending to be someone he wasn't in order to fit in, hoping others would accept him. Ben ended his speech by saying, quote, at New Roads, I'm free to be me, end quote. When young people experience an enduring sense of belonging in an affirmative and inclusive environment, they're more willing to venture out of their comfort zone, take risks, find their purpose, and pave their own unique road. We welcome and encourage this daily. Next slide. I'm sorry, I've been messing up on the slides, haven't I? Okay, I do this every time, so pardon me, everyone. I know my team is like, Mario with the slides again. Okay, second, there's a tradition of relational orientation. That should be the slide 13, I believe, Mark. Our teaching eschews any promotion of mere transactional exchanges among those within our community. The adults don't put so much effort into serving the youth simply because they're just doing their jobs. Instead, we teach youth that one of the most critical capacities to develop is the ability to establish, build, and sustain healthy relationships. Our approach to discipline, for example, is rooted in restorative practices designed to teach youth to manage conflict by taking accountability for how they hold space within relationships with one another. The focus here is on teaching students what it means to be accountable for their contribution to the relational field that informs our individual and collective experience within the New Roads climate and culture. As I explained earlier, that contribution can be either generative, that is affirmative, and integrative, or it can be degenerative, that is negative and disintegrative. Our goal as educators is to make students accountable for the energy they bring into a space in an effort to help them understand the larger point that we are all connected. We are all related in some way. The relational orientation honors the linkages among diverse individuals in a radically inclusive social emotional field. Next slide, I think that should be slide 14. Lastly, there's the practice of holistic integration. The Brown versus Board determination of integration was strictly focused on the legal mandate surrounding social interaction, which was compulsory and therefore largely resisted, as Lutheran spoke of earlier. Holistic integration is precisely the opposite. It is the affirmation of our institution's values reflected in all aspects of our operation through positive relationships among individuals and groups. In this way, holistic integration serves as the conduit between radical inclusion and relational orientation, insofar as the social and emotional cohere in the practice. In terms of student life, this is where our co-curricular programming plays a crucial integrative role. We offer a litany of dynamic, engaging programs that provide students countless opportunities for building meaningful, authentic relationships across a broad spectrum of diversity. Mysteries, for example, is a grade-specific human development class where students gather on a weekly basis to practice counsel. Through counsel, youth develop deep interpersonal communication skills across a field of radical diversity. Mysteries fosters a basic understanding and appreciation of those who are radically different from us. Another example of a critical space in which holistic integration is achieved is our Student Leadership Congress, SLC. Broadly speaking, SLC is a venue and platform where student leaders develop their skills as community leaders. That's volunteering, organizing, communication, vision mapping, action planning, student mobilizing, etc. The team itself is a snapshot representation of the many expressions of diversity that constitute our community. Students are diverse at the levels of age, race, class, gender, SES, that's social emotional status, ability, sexual orientation, primary language, neural differentiation, academic performance, and so on. SLC fosters learning how to solve problems and achieve communal goals with those who are radically different from us. Last but not least, there's Town Hall. Town Hall is a weekly all-school assembly where love is affirmed and fear overcome through an overwhelming sense of belonging, access, and communal holding that is generated within a collective space where individuals are invited to be free, to be themselves, and to be as one. Town Hall is also the space in which we truly leverage our diversity to model the endless possibilities of human expression that are at our students' fingertips if they simply choose to plug in and be present. This dynamic space gives us a consistent platform to showcase embodied expressions of what we truly value. I'd like to close with a reflection from another student who recently graduated, Alia Mack. At our end of the year town hall meeting, Alia described how feeling comfortable and the deep sense of belonging she experienced at New Roads allowed her to lean proudly into all aspects of her identity that define her as a young Black woman, despite the fact that she, quote, didn't look like most of the other students. All of the features, practices, programs, and students I've discussed are prime examples of how we leverage diversity to show how critical difference is to the expansion of human curiosity, imagination, ingenuity, and the liberation of human potential. All of these kids embody radical acts of inclusion. They are relationally oriented in all they do and in all aspects of their being. And they're comfortable holistically integrating into any social relational field in which they find themselves. This group is exceptional because they learn how to fully manifest the power of their contribution to our social, emotional, relational field. This is our picture of wellness at New Roads. Thank you all so much for your time and attention, and I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Daniela Finisei.
Good morning, all. Thank you for being with us. I'm Daniela Finisei, Assistant Head of School at New Roads. Next slide, please. Learning at New Roads School reflects the world and its people. As an authentically diverse community, New Roads understands the value of connection, well-being, and joy. Our village delights in learning because our students are engaged in their studies, they understand the interconnected nature of reality, and they participate in their learning through the empathic facilitation of our faculty. We must tear down the walls between school and life. We graduate courageous citizens of conscience that understand holistically their impact through the deep relationships that they foster in our community. In turn, our students leave New Roads with a greater sense of belonging, a commitment to the humanity in each of us, deep respect for varying perspectives, and an understanding that radical change for our people and this planet can only come from loving kindness. Next slide. Over the last several years, New Roads School embarked on a journey of self-discovery to codify our approach to teaching and learning in an authentically diverse community. We worked closely with Dr. Dan Siegel and studied the connections between the cognitive and the emotional, and how this impacts the culture and climate within our classrooms. Our faculty deepened their knowledge of neuroscience and interpersonal neurobiology. They researched the science of relationships and how secure attachments, awareness, and attunement leads to deep, meaningful learning for our students. Next slide. Our work with Dan Siegel helped us realize that the young people in our care are not just disembodied brains. They are embodied and present beings. In this vein, their humanity must be recognized. Their well-being must be at the core of our teaching, and our curriculum and assessment must evolve to meet them, our young people. In other words, our curriculum is mind-based and connected to our commitments. It recognizes our students beyond their cognitive abilities. When our faculty are able to connect deeply with our students and are attuned to their needs, the amygdala hijack, also known as the fight or flight response, can be avoided, allowing for our students to deepen their understanding and be participants in their learning. Next slide. After several years of research, we recognize that the New Roads teacher is the present empathic facilitator of human development, social, emotional, and intellectual, the liberator of human potential. Our teaching must be meaningful, relevant, and connected for our students. And as is life, New Roads understands that learning takes time, connection, and is process and discovery driven. This allows for our students to find meaning in their learning and make connections for a lifetime. This is learning for life. Next slide. One of the most inspiring quotes from Dan Siegel is his notion of presence, which really describes our approach to a generative learning environment at New Roads. Presence is the gateway for integration, which gives rise to well-being, compassion, kindness, and innovation. Next slide. So here I wanted to share with you an example of how our faculty recognize the individuality of each of our students from the moment they step foot on our campus. What you see here are two poems written by our kindergartners in their social studies class. As part of their identity unit, students wrote poems that represented parts of themselves that they are proud of. In this exercise, students also chose colors that they felt represented their skin color and painted a backdrop, which you see behind them in these pictures. As these students begin their journeys at New Roads, our faculty is already encouraging them to honor one another's differences and promote their linkages. This is how a generative social field is cultivated and encouraged. Next slide. New Roads honors the humanity in each individual, even within our approach to trajectory. Most of our life journeys are nonlinear. Our students are encouraged to follow their passions in a nonlinear trajectory that really honors a human system. Each student at New Roads has a personalized schedule, and no schedule is alike. As is life, New Roads understands learning takes time, connection, and is process-driven. We understand that students need to feel safe and secure enough to take risks, make mistakes, and learn from their struggles while knowing that they are held by our village. Next slide. Our singular purpose as a living community can be summed up by the following. When we equip students with the essentials, help awaken their sense of self, justice, and purpose, open the doors of knowledge and wisdom, and encourage them to step through and choose their own adventure, to a large degree, we fulfill our purpose as educators by helping students become their own teachers. Lutheran?
Yeah, before we open it up for questions, one of, a great educational leaders, he's a thought leader, and he came up with this quotation that we felt really described the essence of New Roads. And so we wanted to end with that, which is all of this might make New Roads sound like a utopian community. And it is unashamedly idealistic. And I'll say that again, it is unashamedly idealistic, but it achieves great academic outcomes precisely because of its commitment to diversity. And so I think that, in the presentation, what we hope that people start to think about are some of the fundamental assumptions that drive our institution and fundamental assumptions that drive education, and how do we need to rethink some of those assumptions to really unleash possibility. And so we are now looking forward to engaging with all of you. Jackie?
Thank you again to the New Roads team. We are so appreciative of your time, for everyone being here. And Donna, I just want to pass it over to you for any final thoughts for the group. We have our president on the line, Donna Oram.
Thanks, Jackie. Yes, I'm such a fan of New Roads that I couldn't miss this. So I cleared my schedule for it, and am so appreciative to the work that Lutheran, Mark, Mario, and Daniela are doing. And you're just making such a difference in the world. And I think you're such an inspiration for us. But the other thing, I've heard you tell your story many times, and I learn something new every time. And I think, I love the words you use to describe the work that you do. Words like ensemble is not something necessarily that we hear when we think about teams working together. It's just such a wonderful image, and first responders for children. So, I thank you for what you're doing. I thank you for being so generous of sharing your time with everyone. And I wish you the best, and I am always anxious to find out what's next for New Roads. So thank you.